Hello. This offstage voice, much like SpongeBob's Frenchie the narrator, is coming from Zachary Dorsey. I'm an associate professor here in the School of Theatre and Dance at James Madison University, and I'm one of the dramaturgs. I am thrilled that we are having this panel today about sustainability in the theatre, and with our production in particular. And I'd love for our three brave and bold panelists who are giving up their time here during Tech Week to chat with us, to introduce themselves before we dive on in.
Kathleen Connery, I am the costume shop manager here, and I am designing the costumes for SpongeBob.
My name is Meyer. I am a junior architectural design major with a double major in studio art and minors in theater, and I am the scenic designer for SpongeBob.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Kelly. I am the technical director, scenic mentor, and props designer for SpongeBob.
Again, the focus for this panel today is talking about sustainability, green initiatives within the theater, and within our production of SpongeBob SquarePants the Musical in particular. So I wonder if the three of you might start by just sharing a thing or two, a bit of context for our audience about what's going on in the theater industry today around green movements and sustainability issues.
Green theater is kind of growing. We are just now looking, I think, in the past 20 years and seeing the waste that theater presents and the sheer amount of material use that it presents, and going, well, someone should do something about that. Currently, one of the larger efforts is called the Broadway Green Alliance. It was run, I think it's still Danielle Whirl who is their president, and they actually sought within the Broadway community to see how they could explore low waste, no waste productions, or how they could cut down and recycle some of the additional materials and essentially try and make a lower waste world. Now we are also seeing other universities kind of pick this up. The last one I know that does one every year was University of Hawaii Manoa. One of my friends made a cardboard set. So there is some context for what's happening. There is a lot of interest in green theater, and we are starting to see a lot of research being done in green theater, but it is still quite new, which is fun.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's as much being done in costumes in that same sense, although to a certain extent costumes has always been the reuse part of reduce, reuse, recycle. There are multiple houses that actually purchase out the costumes when a Broadway show closes, and then you can rent those costumes as a package or just go in and rent costumes. And so I know that most theaters pull from their own stock a definite portion of the show and then will thrift shop some of it and then rent some of it. So it's most theaters, especially most educational theaters, it's not going to be 100% built. You cannot do that.
Yeah.
So, but there's less of a movement the way you're describing of low waste, no waste, make it out of cardboard. But there is definitely a strong movement of reuse what you can find, lend what you've got, borrow what you need. And to a small extent, there's also a movement for paying more attention to the detergents that you use and the fabric that you use, and trying to, if possible, go for a less environmentally impactful product. Budget can, stomp on your foot that way, but that's what we go for, try, pay attention to.
And I can definitely speak from an architectural perspective. So in architecture, now we're starting to realize that, oh wow, the buildings that we're constructing, substantial environmental impact on the physical ground as well as the resources that we're taking away. And one of the things that I found interesting was I was taking this class called Materials and Methods, and I found so many new materials that were like renewable, like bamboo is like, especially here in Harrisonburg, we have like a bamboo forest that's completely invasive. And it's like, how could we utilize bamboo, for example, to create new structures? And what really interested me about the sustainability portion of it was the fact that when I was applying for the Undergraduate Development Professional Award grant, I was really looking into I was really looking to the materiality of different aspects, because one of the things that I noticed in JMU theater, for example, was the lack of that experimentation of different types of materials. And that's what I was, and like with being on SpongeBob and seeing, like, knowing that SpongeBob has like an underlying message about the pollution within the ocean and the toxic waste, I thought it'd be like a perfect time to like kind of look at our scene shop and like see, it's like we have all of these plastic tarps that end up just kind of sitting in a corner that never been used, and that just got me curious into thinking, what if we were to able to use this in a show, and looking at the canvas that we have and starting to use that in the show, and taking like plastic bags that are just kind of scattered throughout, and just like, how could I use this plastic bag to like add more to the set almost, and just doing that in sort of ways. And now as we're going towards tech, and as we like start as we like go into like the closing of SpongeBob, one of the things that I'm now thinking is like is the waste of it, because I really don't want to see these beautiful canvas and these plastic tarps just end up in another waste. And so I've just been kind of brainstorming on my own thing. It's like, well, I know that there's a high school. I know there's a Harrisonburg High School here that could maybe benefit from these different types of materials, and maybe like they would be able to start experimenting, like, oh, like theater can use like canvas, and they can use these like found materials everywhere to create a story and to create like a theatrical story almost. And so that's what has been like sort of developing almost.
Yeah, and there's been some interesting stuff as far as Kira Handy. She's our Broadway Green Alliance representative. She actually came to me last semester, and she'd done all this research, because one of the things I was interested in is like, okay, the labor is tight, money is tight, in just like in all theater. What are some small ways that we can like start to work on our sustainability, even as we don't do like a big project like this? And so one of the things she brought up was it's low VOC paint, using a very specific brand of paint, which was affordable, so we swapped to that. A big one is, where is your materials from? My big example is always Luan, which is a common 1/4-inch plywood material, is commonly deforested from the Philippines and then shipped from the Philippines. So it's got a massive carbon footprint. So finding American-made products, and especially locally made products that we can implement, has been kind of key.
I wonder if you can provide just a little bit of context, not of the whole theater industry, but about sustainability initiatives at JMU School of Theater and Dance in particular. I think I'm hearing that a number of choices from various designers and practitioners over the years have done some sustainability work, but am I right in hearing that this is sort of the first large-scale full production that has sustainability both as kind of the message of the show and also the overall design concept? Could you talk about that for a few seconds?
I would say that last statement is very true. I've been here for, it's almost 30 years now, and this is the first show I can think of that intentionally is reusing what would be considered waste, and intentionally focusing on reducing and reusing and recycling. We are using bubble wrap to stuff things where we would usually use batting, polyester batting. We have done that before, but not in an intentional way. It was more like, this has to be lightweight and we have this, so let's use it. But if we'd had batting, we would have used batting.
Yeah.
This time we're like, no, we're using bubble wrap. Everybody, after Christmas, don't throw away your bubble wrap, bring it in. We have old CDs that nobody wants anymore, and we are using them on props and in the costumes. We have VHS tapes. The only option is throwing it out. Or I could smash open the case, take out the tape, and make a wig. This is an intentionally motivated use of items that were always there.
Yeah, it's kind of the same in us. Over the years, I inherited this shop about a year and a half ago, and I noticed the sheer amount of material that I'd gotten used, especially in previous years. There are some materials that were more commonly used in theater in the years past, but as we've grown to be a little more eco-friendly, we realized they're not so harmful. So I had piles and piles and piles of styrofoam. And so I remember sitting there, and when Kathleen actually originally was like, ooh, I want to use trash in the things. And that got me kind of talking to Meyer about like, what are some potentials for this? We have all of this material, we have all this plastic, we have leftover stuff. Yeah. And so what was really cool about that is, like, as scenic mentor, I kind of went to Meyer and I was like, cool, we need to look from the very beginning and see what we have before we make any decisions. And so even part of that is like you can probably speak a little more to like the actual design process. But I
Yeah.
remember kind of talking to you about like, okay, we can do this shape, but it's going to take extra plywood, or we can do this, but
Yeah.
it's going to take extra this. So like that was very much a part of the entire design process, was that idea that we wanted to use less, to buy less, and use what we had.
I remember, like, I think it was last semester too, when I just started to send in the application for the grant. I remember talking with you specifically. It's like, I want to explore with these different types of materials. I'm seeing like a lack of this experimentation. And then now, as we started going into the design process for SpongeBob, I've now started to realize it's like, oh, I want to increase the scope of this grant to also not only explore the materiality, but also to explore like how we can utilize these sustainable materials and how we can continue going on from this. And I think one of the big things from a design standpoint that I was really fascinated with was with this canvas, because I saw the canvas drops that we did for Sunday in the Park with George, and I remember looking at that and going, man, it'd be so cool if I could do something similar to this. But like, how could I make it like stand out, and how can I make it like so cartoonish and just so out there? And I was like, well, we have this drop. We also have a lot of the chicken wire, and then we also have a lot of the plastic tarps. And so I just started experimenting one time, and like over winter break, and I was just kind of like putting these two things together. And I looked at it from 10 feet apart, and I was like, oh my God, I got it. Because I started off in my model just kind of taking wrinkled up paper, just kind of wrinkling it up and going, this is like what ocean rock is. And I was kind of like, oh, like this would be so cool. And I still did that. I was still up in there, I was like, I don't like this crease. And I started like wrinkling up, like tearing it at it. It was like, now this is perfect.
It became very improvisational though. Like when we actually finally started, especially working on the False Pro, which we were chatting about, I kind of had to remind Myra, I'm like, this is something that it's a sculpture. We are making a sculpture as we are doing this. So it's hard. We can have a general shape, which is cool to try and reach, but we don't know how this material is going to react. We've never worked with plastic paint drop before.
And I think my assistants really did help me a lot with that. Like I have a good amount of experience with like those materials just because of what we do in architecture. But actually all my assistants they really jumped in on it. For example, Nathan, he's another architecture major. He was talking to me about like how we can change the chicken wire, and how can we like impact the way that it's kind of folded on itself and stuff, and how can we like create twists and knots like that. And then Ryan has like a background, one of my other assistants, he has a background in like sculpture work. So he just had like a really fun time just kind of looking at the tarp and just kind of like placing things and going at it. And Tara, from a performance aspect, was just kind of like dancing around, like moving from one area, dancing to the next area, and trying to like moving back and forth almost, and never staying in that one spot. And it was so fascinating to see that entire process and that collaboration effort. Because I always preach about the idea that I don't think assistants should be like limited to just doing like, oh, like you just do this. Like I think assistant designers should have their own agency to say like, oh, I want to do this, and I as a principal designer can go, okay, what's your reason for that? Why do you want to do this? They give me that reason, they tell me why. I'm like, good, now go at it, show me what you can do when you're giving me all these reasons. So
I'm hearing y'all talk about play, about dancing around, about improvisation, and I want to connect that a bit, as well as Meyer's repeated statement, it's so cool, to something that I think we've all heard Kate Lumpkin, the director for our production, talk about a number of times. She's often suggested that the spirit of SpongeBob SquarePants is joy, right? It's pleasure. And within the musical itself, we've got this community of under the sea folks coming together to avert an ecological disaster, right? And I just wonder if you might talk about how joy and pleasure not only has been a part of your process, but also how it connects to themes of sustainability and considerations of the environment.
yeah, one of the things that I told Lindsay pretty early on, and I told Kate really early on about this, is that I want to be able to play with this design. I want to feel like I'm a 5-year-old back in my little sandbox and kind of just creating something and just going, oh, that looks so cool, and like destroying it and doing something again. And now with my architecture background, what I've been doing is that as I'm playing around with stuff, now I'm starting to ask these questions like, okay, why is this form coming into space? Or like why are actors moving from this space to this next space? And it's like, how could I create this like spatial moment in terms of like the overall set and design like that? But still, I was having so much fun just kind of like ooh, what if I just folded like that? Ooh, I don't like that. Let me just rip that off. Ooh, what if I just like put this over here? I like that. I'm gonna keep it right there. And it's like I had such a blast just kind of go through that, and then like me telling Lindsay about this process and me telling Kate about this process, they had like a complete joy because I remember like during my one-on-ones with Lindsay, Lindsay was always encouraging me to like always think like outside of the box and like consider like these aspects, and seeing that usually most design kind of goes unfocused, and then Kate is really going in on that aspect of like keep finding that joy and keep finding that play to it. And I've just been keeping that attitude up as we like are still going to like this tech week where we're gonna start doing like decoration items, and my assistants are just gonna have a blast just making these smaller scenic props, putting it on, looking at it, and going, nah, let's not put it there, taking it off, ripping it apart, and doing something else with it. So
One of the concepts that me and Kate talked about, because I've been building this fun fact since November. As props, I tried to get ahead because I do so many things. And go, okay, how can I start this while we're still in design meetings and still finalizing a set? How can I make this work? So one of the things that like me, Meyer, and Kate and Kathleen talked about in early meetings was this idea that anyone can make this, and that we wanted folks to go home and look at the materials and the things that we had put on stage and know, hey, you can make this too. Like, we're not using anything special. We're using umbrellas and yoga balls and cardboard, so much cardboard, and all things that you find in your garage or around your house. And that was something really important to me, is that it looked like something that you could go home and make. Now, we're experienced practitioners, so yours might not look exactly the same. Kids could go home and look at SpongeBob and be, oh, I'm gonna go play SpongeBob. I've got a super soaker. That can be an Avalanche Maker 3000. Let's go. And then suddenly they've got themselves a game. And being and thinking like a child in the way that a child would, and like, how can we make this out of what we have available, has been really, really fun. And I've been including a lot of students in on it.
Fun fact that not a lot of people know is that for about 20-something years, we had a summertime children's theater where we would do plays for the community. Our college actors, children's plays, and I would usually design costumes for, I think we did 3, and I would do costumes for 2, and I loved that because it's all about thinking fun and thinking funny and thinking in ways that are just not your standard. This character would wear blue jeans and a t-shirt with a corduroy jacket and high-top shoes because they are in architecture or something. This was a chance for me to think that way again. Fish who live in Bikini Bottom, we pulled 2 racks worth of costumes that we pulled from our stock that we bought at thrift stores, all in the right color palette of blues, greens, and purples. Tops, bottoms, layers. And the performers were invited to shop their costume. They came in and I told them, it can't be one color, has to be at least 2, 3 is better. Can't be one pattern, has to be at least 2, 3 is better. And you can have as many layers as you want, has to be at least 3, 4 is better. And they went through and chose the items that spoke to them and combined them. And then I would say, I love that, but you need more pattern. Or let's change, since you got 3 purples, let's change one of those to a green. And so they had an opportunity to make their own choices, during which time they had a really, they had a ball. It was my joy because I loved totally crazy outfits. What I told them was, you might see this on a theater major, but you're not going to see it over in the School of Business. No, they can't disagree. I've seen how they dress. They're conservative. This is not conservative in its look. This is very wild, very off the rails, very break the rules, and that's fun. It's also ties completely into the sustainability. We didn't build a single thing for any one of those costumes.
wow.
And that's, I would say it's the whole company, basically. Because we didn't build any of the ensemble, or really any of the leads except for 1, 2, 3 people.
What does that mean, we didn't build?
We
anything?
bought or we pulled. We would fit and alter, so it's not like it's no work. Fit, alter, dye, paint. But in terms of actually buying fabric, cutting it out, and sewing it to a specific designed look, we only did that for 3 people. And that's because one of them is a computer. One of them was a kind of a dress that I really, really wanted. And if I could have found it, I'd have bought it, but I couldn't find it, so we built it. Those pieces weren't things we could find, so those were built.
What's also great is that with the sustainable method, folks are able to see recycling, see reimagining things, taking care of the environment and one another, not just as an obligation, a thing we have to do, but something that can be joyful in its own right and fun. It's an opportunity to exercise, play, and wonder. And so I really appreciate y'all speaking to that. Why don't we just take a few minutes for each of you to share kind of 1 or 2 specific design choices, a discovery you made, a thing you crafted, something that you would really love for our audience to know about in particular, whether they're watching this interview before or after they see the production. What are some of the things you're proudest of that you don't mind bragging about during this video?
In some ways, I need to see it on stage to be sure. I'm very pleased with the design for Karen, the sexy computer, but I haven't seen everything together. And I haven't seen everything together on stage, under lights, against the set, surrounded by the props. And that will be the real telling point of, ooh, did it work, did it work? So far, though, I feel very positive about it. The dress that we made for Mrs. Puff, who is what I'm trying to have the blow-up tire inside, because she's a pufferfish. When it was all put together in these tiers of ruffles with a little white Peter Pan collar, so many students came in and were like, oh my God, I want that dress. Because it was cute. And I hadn't really intended that, but it sure came out cute. So, I'm pleased that it's as an actual garment, people think it's really fun. Because I also know that as the character is interpreted, it's really fun.
I think one of the things that I'm really super proud of is the color. I'm really happy with how I had, when I was doing when I was coloring in my model, I had doubts about the color and I had doubts about the technique I was doing. And I remember stepping back and going, is this really gonna work? Is this really gonna actually come together? And thinking about how materials is coming on, it's will it actually portray the way that I want it to be shown? And then just being in that scene shop and just literally just going one by one and just dotting. Little blue blue. I was able to take a step back and look at the whole thing and go, oh my God, it looks so much better. The colors are popping. I see highlights of this one color here. I see a contrast of this color, and then when the canvas was just put in front of that the huge contrast of the deep blues, I sat back in that I sat back in the audience and I was just like, oh wow, this is so much better than what I thought. And I'm also really proud of how I managed to get those curves done, because I really was fascinated by curves. I don't know what's happening with me with curves, but I love having curved architecture, curved design. And so finding a way to incorporate some sort of curvature in that and just playing around with that, for example, because we've been doing a lot of 90 degrees. It's gotta put in a nice 163 angle or something like that.
I guess for me, this has been actually a really fun project. I've been making props for 12 plus years. And so this is one where I have 2 assistants, Kenyon and Emma, and they're awesome. And so, and they've really risen to the occasion. I was expecting to do a lot of training on crafting, and I didn't. And so, one of the things I'm really proud of, that was kind of their brainchild, but I just kind of guided them along in the process, was Gary. I had a vision from the very beginning that I wanted Gary to be on an RC car. Because in the Broadway, he's on a skateboard. And I was like, how anticlimactic. You have this opportunity.
And who is Gary?
Gary is the snail, SpongeBob's pet snail. From the beginning, I really wanted to have him on an RC car. So we talked and worked that out, and they built and sculpted this it looks just like Gary.
Yeah, it's really nice. Really
nice.
nice.
I remember when Emma saw him for the first time, and we put him on the car, and he's rolling around, and she just goes, with like little tears in her eyes. That's scary, because this is something so close to like
Yeah.
every child who watches SpongeBob's hearts is like Gary. So Gary's been cool. Karen was super cool. Her actual, we have her computer body. So like there's the actress and then there's like her computer body. That was painted by a student, Shannon McCarthy, who's a really great painter.
And is in the show.
Yeah, and so we got that built. And so a lot of the stuff that I've gotten to design and work and kind of like touch up has been made by people in my shop. And that's been something that I've been really proud of, is like getting to take a step back and really implement all of the skills and all of the talents of my people, and get to act like a designer and get to kind of craft that and be a guide and a mentor in their creative process. And so having like an overall vision and then getting to say, but I want it to look like this, but here's some creative freedom that you have. So that was really fun. The jellyfish, I think, I'm still getting the lights in them.
Oh,
But right now they already look great. And so I'm putting little lights in them, and I think those are going to be breathtaking.
The involvement of the students as assistants and how they also have been given the freedom to think creatively and to participate, and once again to feel the joy of, I'm a part of that. And I should mention Meg Hogan, in fact, she started as an assistant and I changed her to an associate because she came in immediately with so many good ideas. And she's gotten to do some really fun projects too. She's done a tie-dyed shirt for Patrick, which has been fun. She's making the Krabby Patty costume, which hopefully props will paint. But she's done the whole paper mache. There's a reduce, reuse, recycle. We called the Madison Library to see if they had any, because they get subscriptions to all these papers, and then what do they do with them? And they had stacks. And so we picked them up, and she did the first layer as a paper mache with all these reused, all these old newspapers. So it was fun for her. It was creative and imaginative. It gave her a way to feel like she was using something that isn't going to go in the landfill now for quite some time, hopefully. And she's just been a huge part of it, and I know she's having a good time. I know she's having joy. So.
Yeah, in my 271, actually, I'm teaching a props building class right now. So I wanted to bring them in on this, and one of the big things about props is that you need to have resourcefulness, right? Use what you have. And so I didn't buy anything new. We had all the trash and stuff that we had built from under the sea and collected, and I had them build those beautiful little purple flowers that you see everywhere in SpongeBob. And so they got to be a part of it, and they had such a good time, and they all, like, each flower, I gave them the reference image, and I said, cool, I want it to be obvious that it's this, but otherwise I don't care. And to see the joy that they had building it out of soda bottles and cans and pool noodles was also really fun to get them to be part of the process.
As we work to wrap up this panel, I wonder if you have any thoughts you'd be willing to share about lessons learned from this experience that you'll carry with you toward subsequent productions at JMU or elsewhere.
I'm relearning lessons I should have learned before, partly. That's one thing. I love what we're coming up with. I love the ideas. I love the way things look. I love that we have minimized what we've bought as much as possible, though we still had to buy. But I also, it has been challenging. It's challenging both how do you make these materials work in a way that's not, like, you're not going to get the look of the paper because you're using these other materials. There's probably a material you could have bought that would have been just like it. So it's challenging to get what you want with a material that's not really what you want. It's challenging to come up with these great, funny ideas and then have to make them work. I almost wish I'd never even thought of having Mrs. Puff actually blow up. It has been really, really hard. I have two options now, and I hope that they're going to work. But I still don't know if it's going to work. It was a challenge. It was hard. But it's good and it's funny. And so I'm glad.
I will say I am designing the birds, which is coming up next, and getting to experience this has been really cool because I'm actually taking a lot of these concepts and bringing them to the birds. And I've actually invited Meyer back on that process as kind of like a materials consultant.
Yeah.
So he'll be continuing his experimentation into industrial, like ecological industrial products in the birds, which has like all this cool industrial waste around it. So like taking that and going, okay, once again, it's like it gets the mind moving on how can I save money, how can I save material, how can I reuse this. And so most of my material from the birds will also be pulled from what we have. So it's been really cool to go through this process and look and see how I can use it in my own design process, and even as I like continue to advise and work with Meyer.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest lessons that I probably learned throughout this entire process is just the act of collaboration. And it feels weird to me because I feel like I was like, oh, collaboration, I always do that all the time. And then I was really comparing to what I'm doing in architecture in previous years, what I'm doing right now. Architecture is very like, we are doing a lot of projects that are basically like single projects. So we're working on like our individual things. And then for SpongeBob, for example, I'm talking with Lindsay about like, hey, what's like how props and how scenic work together, and how like I'm talking with Kathleen about costumes and colors, and that it's like, okay, how can I have your colors match with this? And in contrast to that, I'm also having my assistants telling me like, hey, we should consider these avenues and these points. And so learning this collaboration between designers and between other people who have been just interested in just telling me things like, oh, what if you did this? What if you did that? What if you did this? And it's just like this whole, I feel like I was just relearning how to collaborate with other people. And I think I'm always going to take away the lessons from this and always just continue to see what I can continue to do next. If you told freshman year me that I'd be designing on a main stage, I'd be like, what? You crazy.
Thanks to you and our audience for watching this video, and thanks to Lindsay Kelly, Meyer Kim, and Kathleen Connery for joining us. Best panel ever.
Thank you, Zach.